Hello, my friends, and welcome back. I'm very excited today. We have Katie Jensen on with us. I want to talk to you a little bit about Katie. Katie is a teacher. She's a secondary ed English teacher. She's taught grades 6 through 12. She's the wife of a retired Air Force pilot, so she was moving for several years, every few years. She's a freelance copy editor. She's a homeschool mother of 4 kids who are absolutely fabulous kids, as well as a Charlotte Mason aficionado. So, for those of you who are new to the program, if you haven't listened to the episode about the different philosophies and styles, Charlotte Mason's philosophy is a homeschooling. It's an educational philosophy, which Katie will talk a little bit more about, as well as share with us some tips and tricks on writing and helping our kids be better writers. So, Katie, thank you so much for coming on the show. And I failed to mention she currently teaches some public school kids and other homeschool kids, and has done online teaching just recently. You just recently stopped doing that, like within the last couple months, correct?
Correct.
So, anyway, super excited to have Katie on the show, and she's just all around an amazing person. So, somebody that the world needs to know because she just makes the world a better place. So, thank you, Katie, for coming on.
Goodness, thanks for the introduction, Janae. That was really nice. Very generous.
Oh, no, it is 100% true. And I've known Katie now for a couple years and have come to love her family, and she's a person who's incredibly wise. So I'm super excited that she was willing to come on today and talk about a few things. So with that, let's get started. So Katie, how did you tell us your background? How did you start homeschooling, teaching, like all of the things?
So I went to school to be a high school teacher. Like I went to university to be a high school teacher, and in my studies, I didn't, you don't get into the education program right away. So I think I must have been a junior, pushing senior. And in some of my research, I kept coming across these articles about homeschoolers, which I thought were interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But I also didn't have the bandwidth at the time to research that because I had so many other things going on. So I just like tucked all these little things about homeschooling into a folder on my thumb drive called Interesting Stuff. And which I did open up years later in that little thumb drive when I felt like I needed it. And so that was like my first, because in high school I only knew one homeschooler, and he joined our musical production of Fiddler on the Roof my freshman year, and he was phenomenal. And all of us girls were just like, oh my gosh, he is so nice. Holy cow, he is so talented. So anyway, so it was like my only homeschooler I ever knew. And then I have this, interest blooming in university. And then I had my first little girl, and we were in Germany. She was 2.5 months old, and I was suddenly introduced to all of these homeschool families because a lot of military families do choose to homeschool for a couple of reasons. One, they like the consistency a homeschool education brings to your child, and also because you're living in all these different places, and so homeschool gives you the opportunity to like go and experiences all of these places. So in Germany, obviously, a lot of people pull their kids out for those 2, 3, 4, 8 years. Some of them were there for a long time.
Wow.
And they would go explore. So anyway, they were all really stellar families, really bright and really cohesive families, which was really kind of cool to see. And yeah, and so I ended up homeschooling for preschool while we were in Germany, and then we moved to Arkansas, and so I continued to homeschool for preschool, and then it was time to put her in kindergarten, and she was a full 11 months younger than her little friend who would also be going into kindergarten with her. And this little friend could read, and Emmy didn't even know all 26 letters yet. Yeah. So I thought, I'll just keep her home for kindergarten. It's not even required. And it was full day. There was no option for half day kindergarten. Mm-hmm. And I was like, there's just no way. She's barely 5. I'm going to keep her home for a year. I went to school to be an educator. I got this. Anyway, and the rest is kind of history because we moved to California and the schools were a mess where we moved, and I just wasn't going to put her in there. And one thing led to another, and I just kind of stuck with it. Stumbled upon Charlotte Mason when she was in 1st to 2nd grade. I was just looking at curriculum and found that I was really attracted. Obviously, as an English major, I was really attracted to literature based curricula. And so everything I was finding was, quote, Charlotte Mason inspired. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And so eventually found, we eventually moved to Colorado, and I found a group, a Charlotte Mason group. And then they told me about this conference. And I knew it, I had read all the volumes of Charlotte Mason, several Charlotte Mason companions. I've now been to the conference by Charlotte Mason Institute, I think 6 times
Wow.
in the last
Wow,
10 years. And I've been homeschooling for 12 years. But anyway, so it's become very much what we do.
Yeah.
It's like a family culture now. Honestly, our Charlotte Mason is like, it's our family culture. Yeah.
Would you mind sharing? Because when we had talked before, you had talked a little bit about, because I do want to get back to the Charlotte Mason, but you had talked about during your student teaching experience and what you saw. Would you mind sharing that experience?
Yeah. So there was, I was student teaching. So I was a senior and just about to graduate. And there was this kid, I was in a remedial reading 9th grade class. That was one of my classes I was assigned. And there was this kid, and he was kind of tough, acted out a lot, didn't really do his work, mostly got zeros. But I, and while I was teaching him, I could see him respond. Like there was response, like there was interest in him. So anyway, so I was in the teacher's like office, like this big shared office lounge area. And my back was turned to the teachers, and I was on my computer getting things done. And I heard the actual teacher for that class, because I was just a student teacher, come in and basically say something to the effect of that this kid was just like a good for nothing. Like he's not going anywhere, and just had no hope for him. Right. And at this point, we are well into the second semester. Probably, I would say like February, March. Because I do remember I'd had the student for a little while, enough to know him and know that there's potential. And really trying to, like, here I am fresh out of college, and I'm like, no, every kid has potential, right? Like I'm like fresh eyed, bushy tailed, like, oh, I've got this and I'm going to make a difference. And I could see potential in this kid, and to hear his teacher speak of him that way, really bothered me. And it was another drop in my bucket of that I didn't know existed yet, that there are alternative methods to educating our children. I had no intention of homeschooling. That wasn't really on my radar, but I think that was another thing in my bucket of like, hey, this isn't always the best place for everybody. And anyway, it made me really sad. But I, through that semester, I did come through, for him, like he responded, this kid responded well. He ended up passing my class and did well. And, I don't know, it was a good example, a bad example, I guess, of some teachers. They just don't have the, I don't know, bandwidth for some kids.
Well, I think it's interesting because we always assume like all teachers are, that they're in the profession because it's noble. And the reality is there's crappy teachers out there. There's great ones. And then we all know, those of us been in the profession are like, oh no, there's some bad ones too. And it's hard to get them fired, like it's.
Well, there are a lot of teachers who choose it as a backup profession. So,
yeah. Yep. Yeah. So, and I love the fact that you saw him, you saw this child, you saw who he was and what his potential is, because he needed that,
Right.
And so, which then you said, drop in your bucket to start homeschooling. So let's get back to Charlotte Mason, because I thought that was really anyway, it broke my heart, but I think it's an example of, this does happen in the classroom for as much as we want to pretend like it doesn't. Right. It does. Yep. And so there we are. So let's talk about Charlotte Mason then. Okay. Describe Charlotte Mason for those who this is their first episode tuning in.
I love Charlotte Mason. Charlotte Mason is, she was an educator at the turn of the century, the 1900s, turn of the century, and she, late 1800s. And she basically saw all these children in England who were not being educated. And she said, every child deserves an education. Every child deserves that care. And that, so she helped, part of her mission was to help educate mothers on how to educate their children and to teach them and to take that time with their kids. Because a lot of the poor children couldn't afford it, couldn't go, whatever. There were so many obstacles for them to go. So that's why she even started this, and why she became interested. Anyway, so she is amazing, and she has a set of 20 principles that really guide every decision that is made when homeschooling children. But the first is the most important, and the first principle is children are born persons. And all that means is that they are born just the way they are. And they have different capacities and interests that are all built into their little bodies. And the second principle is something along the lines of that they have capacity for good and for evil, but they're not born evil. So they're just born persons. And I love that. And so one of the themes throughout a Charlotte Mason education, or principle, if you will, is that they are not for our molding. Like, we're not taking this child and we're putting it on our pottery wheel and molding it into what we want at all. They're not vessels to be filled, but rather they are persons. And our goal as parents and as mothers is to be in partnership with the Holy Spirit to help them to become all that they're supposed to be as this person who was given to us. And I love that. And I have seen this play out in my life so many times, that if I am just willing to put the faith in to pray first, as I plan my year, plan my week, plan my day, what my child needs to learn, that it happens, and that things are placed in front of us, or we open the right book, or whatever the case is. But that is the foundation of a Charlotte Mason education.
That's so beautiful. So what does it look like? Like, what does a day in the life of the Jensen homeschool look like as you employ the Charlotte Mason philosophy? Predominantly. I don't think there's any purists out there for any one philosophy. I think, I've talked about that before.
Yeah.
But you're predominantly Charlotte Masoners. Yeah. So what does a day look like for you guys?
Excuse me.
You okay?
Yeah. So we basically school. My goodness. We set aside the morning time from like 9 to 12. And we sit together. Right now I have a 5th and a 7th grader, basically, at home full time. And they, we do a lot of family work first. So we'll do a song, and we do 2 different kinds of songs right now, folk song and a hymn. And we alternate days on when we do which one. And then we do poetry, recitation. So that's, we do poetry and recitation together. It's basically 3 subjects so far. And then we'll do something together like Shakespeare. Right now we're just learning about Shakespeare. I thought that in the past I've always just done a play, but right now we're learning about him and about the Globe Theater, and just about Shakespearean theater. Or we'll do architecture, or we're doing ancient history together. So all of these things are, spread out through the 5 days, but we always do some of these shorter lessons, such as a song. We always do the news, which is citizenship. And we always do poetry every day and recitation every day. But then we alternate these other subjects in as a family, and we do these together, the 3 of us. Then we separate into some of the things. So then I separate their list basically into what they can do by themselves, because they are upper elementary / middle school. There's a lot they can do on their own, that they do on their own. And then there's stuff that they need help with, like math or grammar or writing. And so I separate their list into those 2 categories, and then I bounce between the kids, and they do something on their own while I work with the other student, and we do that. And I do one of Charlotte Mason's method, part of this philosophy or method is short lessons.
Like about how long when you say short?
Well, for their ages, I mean, obviously folk song takes 5 minutes, right? Because
Yeah.
you intro and you read the song and you sing it along and then you outro and whatever. And then poetry, like 5 minutes, right? Architecture needs like 20 to 25 minutes, and that's max. But that's because we learn about it and we draw a piece of the building or whatever. And history is usually 10 to 15 minutes, depending on if they're doing a written narration for that lesson or not, or a drawing or something like that. It depends. But the reading part will usually be about 10. And the purpose of this is two things. First, you're like tackling an elephant, right? With really short lessons, and you're painting a big picture, but you're doing it in pieces. And another part of it, and this is a really important part, especially for elementary school children, is the habit of attention. Just learning how to focus. And we live in a world that where we don't like to watch videos that are longer than 30 seconds.
15 seconds.
Right. And that's about how much we can consume. Or news articles are getting shorter and shorter and shorter because people don't want to sit down for 15 minutes to read an entire article. So things like that. And so we're teaching the habit of attention. And so if in that 10 minutes, your kid is clearly losing interest, shut the book and move on, because you don't want to have to get to a point where you're like, come back. But rather like, oh, they're done with this lesson. That's okay. We are going to continue this tomorrow or on Wednesday or whatever. And so, anyway, so so these short lessons. And so it's just like before you know it, by the end of your 3 hours, you've given your child a feast. And that's one of the metaphors that she uses throughout her volumes, is that there's a spreading of a feast because we have these children and we don't know what they are fully capable of because we did not design them. Offering them this feast helps open their world and lets them know, like, my 15-year-old loves architecture. That is something he never would have gotten in public school.
Yeah.
And that is something I wouldn't have been naturally inclined to teach him. But because I taught him architecture, he has found a love for design and even decor and just building. And of course, he takes that to his Lego table and has built some really pretty spectacular buildings and really interesting design, like modern design. And it's been really fascinating to watch. But that's because I spread that feast before him and he was introduced to that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, one thing I appreciate that you said, because I think, when we come out of the public school system, we automatically assume like, oh no, we have to do an hour of math and we have to do an hour of reading. And the reality is, in school, most of that time is wasted.
Absolutely.
Between transitions and getting everyone settled and, packing up before they go, they're only getting 10 to 15 minutes anyway per class, really, And so, but I love that, as your family points out, you can do these short little, just quick bites and they still learn. They especially learn.
You do not have to take a math lesson and do the whole thing in one sitting just because that's what the curriculum says you should do. That it's lesson 23 and this is what we're going to do today. I've gone through these, my particular math curriculum, for instance, this is my third time through some of these books. And I have notes in there from the first time I went through it with my second child, and he could not sit through an entire lesson. And so there are notes through all these lessons where I cross, I make a line like start here tomorrow. Like this is where you ended off. And because that was okay. And it took him a little longer to get through that book, but that's okay. He's doing great in math. Like he's fine, and I'm so grateful to see that now. Like at the time when he was in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, made me nervous, but short lessons you want your kid to be attentive. You don't want to teach them the habit of inattentiveness, You want them to be attentive.
So with Charlotte Mason, do you have, is there a specific curriculum that you use, or are there a series of things that you pull from?
So Charlotte Mason can be done in so many different ways. There are curricula that you can use. But if you know the philosophy, you can build it from good books. That's all it is building a curriculum from good books. You have to know books, to be able to do that on your own. But there are some really good resources. The best free resources I have found is amblesideonline.com .com, one of those. Anyways, that's where I started and it was wonderful. It's free. And then you just go buy the books. I now purchase a membership to Charlotte Mason Institute's Alviary, which saves me. It's, in this phase of my life, I need someone to do all the planning for me.
Yeah.
So that's
which
amazing.
which we'll all include those in the show notes so that people can go and,
Yeah.
and check those out, those two things out. So, okay. So then afternoon, okay. One of the tenets of Charlotte Mason too is you keep talking about books, but you're not talking about textbooks.
Oh, no, no, no.
So let's talk about that because again,
We hate textbooks.
when we come to the public school world, we go, I need these textbooks, but they're not effective. So talk about that a little bit.
No. Oh boy. So Charlotte Mason has two kinds of books that she talks about, and one's twaddle and one's living. A twaddle book is like the sweet meat. She calls it the sweet meat. It's just all these interesting factual books or things that are really colorful and grab kids' attention. And when I was going to school to be a teacher, these are the books that they would tell you to put in front of boys because boys hate reading. And so this is what you should put. It's better that boys read something than nothing. And it's fine. So we don't.
It's the Twinkies. They're the Twinkies.
They're the Twinkies of books. Yeah. That is a great, yes, twaddle or Twinkies. Living books are full of ideas. And these ideas are, they last. They are timeless. That's the word I'm looking for. These are timeless ideas. They're full of heroes and leaders in history who've made mistakes, and they're dynamic. These characters are dynamic, and the stories are dynamic, and they pull you in because they're real and not because they're nonfiction. A lot of them are fiction, but they're real, relatable, and again filled with ideas that children ruminate on when they're quietly playing in the afternoons or building something or climbing a tree. And it's in most cases, like all of our history books are typically very narrative driven. And so they are stories, and history literally is a story. And so instead of reading a textbook filled with facts and dates and names, we're reading stories of famous people, and we're keeping all of this on a giant timeline so that we can see the story of history unfold. And the same goes with science. We, instead of learning, here's a atom, here's a molecule, here's what a cell is. Instead of just learning that, we're learning about the scientists who discovered these things. We're not just learning a snippet. Like, in the textbook, they'll have a sidebar about this scientist. No, we're reading their biographies, and we're reading their whole story and how they discovered. Why were they interested in it? Why were they filled with a sense of awe when they saw a baby born? And they were curious, how did this thing come about? And so it's fascinating, and it fosters this sense of wonder in your children and makes them realize that they too can discover great things, and they too can be great leaders, because these are just normal people. These aren't just great people. These are normal people who had great ideas.
So give some examples of living books, really rich, some of your favorites.
Sure. So last year, my 8th grader read the autobiography of Frederick Douglass. That was an excellent book. Oh my gosh, I'm going to have to think here. I mean, A Little Princess is a living book. That story is so beautiful and has so many ideas full of finding joy and having faith and devotion to family and friends. That's a beautiful, beautiful story. I don't know if anybody's read the Burgess book of Burgess Bird Book, which is just a beautiful story about birds, but you end up learning about the interaction and the community of these animals, and it's beautiful too. And so that would be, those two are really great for elementary school. For older kids, tons of really great biographies, and oh my gosh, I wish I could just list them out for you, but I can't remember all the names. But there's one on Abigail Adams that we really loved. There's one right now, Callie's reading one on Louis Braille. We're learning, we're in Great War era of U.S. history right now, and there are just so many harrowing stories. We're learning about, we just read about the Red Baron in our history book, which is the Story of Nations by Simply Charlotte Mason. So I don't know. There are so many good books. They're all on my shelf behind me. And if you could ask, if you asked me, I could like pull them and stack them here for you, but we don't have time for me to go through all of them.
Well, I think it's interesting too because as humans, I mean, she was dead on. Like we learn through story.
Oh,
We
absolutely.
love stories, even as adults.
Mhm.
I'm reading Keeper of the Lost Cities
Uh-huh.
with my with my daughter, which is a contemporary fiction
Yeah.
story about elves. And my 15-year-old's like, "Mom, what do you think? What do you think?" And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I'm super into it." And I actually listen to Heads so that
Oh,
you
I
know,
love it. Don't tell her.
because because we love beautiful
We
stories
do.
about people who I love how you said it that these are ordinary people who do extraordinary things and we can be similar to them,
Absolutely.
you know.
We can't just look at people like George Washington, and be like, oh, George Washington on his pedestal, he was perfection. Because we will never try to be that. We will never,
Mm-mm.
as people, we're like, we can never reach that. But if we learn of his story and the mistakes that he made, then we can see him as a person that did great things. And that we too can have the capacity for that kind of movement in our lives and that kind of just work and goodness.
I love that. I love that. So tell me what you do in the afternoons with the kids then.
So in the afternoons is when I get all of my things done. So the kids are generally there. So a lot of times what happens is when they are doing school stuff, they there might be an interest. Like for instance, I'll use architecture again. There have been times where my son wanted to make a really more detailed drawing of what we were learning about in architecture, and so I will have him pause that during school because that's a
Mm.
group lesson in my family and we need to move on. And so I'll just pause him. And then in the afternoon, he's got all the time in the world to finish his architecture lesson. And it's also a time that they'll work on whatever handicraft thing they're doing. And that always sounds like such an old timer word, but all it means is like whatever they are working on. It could be something like sewing or like like woodworking or whatever, but it
Mhm.
also could be something like some sort of paper craft or make like my daughter loves to make signs. All of my light switches in the house are labeled because my daughter loves to make signs and loves to label things. That's okay. Like that's a great occupation in the afternoon to organize and to
Yeah.
fix and to clean. So all of those things. But it's whatever they're interested in, and it's very very child led afternoon, and it's just whatever they want to be doing, and it's typically not on screens unless they want to learn how to do something, in which case I'll send them to YouTube University and they can figure it out.
I've come to love YouTube University very much.
Yeah.
Okay, so then let's talk moving into the English part of you and the English teacher part of you, because one of the things that you've been doing is there's been some parents who approached you and said, "Could you teach our children
Yeah.
because what they're getting at school is awful."
Or just insufficient.
Yeah, or
Insufficient.
insufficient,
Yeah.
which I also say is awful.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
tell about that. Let's talk about that for a second.
Right. So I had a friend, because I'm an English major copy editor. People often come to me and they're like, I'm worried about my kids not wanting to read, or I'm worried about my kid not knowing how to write, and he's a
Mhm.
sophomore or he's a junior, whatever. And what do I do? And how can I? I'm not a teacher. I don't like writing either. Like, how am I supposed to help my kid? And so I offered to teach. So I already my two oldest currently are in public school. One's in like an alternative public school, like a just kind of a cool hybrid situation, and one's in a very typical public school. But the one who is a senior came to me last summer or this past summer and asked if I would teach her English, because the English she got in the last 2 years was pathetic.
Yeah.
And my next son, who's a freshman, I just decided after asking the English teacher at his new school what they would be learning about, I realized it would be totally insufficient. Would not teach him very much. So I kept him. I'm teaching him because I'm doing them. I offered to my one of my friends that I could take her kid too and just teach him. Um, and yeah, it's working out really well. The hard thing, if anybody's thinking about this, the tricky part is these kids, they will not receive a letter grade on their transcript. If if they get a transcript from a public school, it'll be a pass or fail grade. Obviously, they'll pass, but anyway, so that is one small thing that matters to some people. But for my friend who gave me her son to educate for English, said it's absolutely worthwhile because he isn't writing and he isn't reading. He got through an entire school year without reading a single book last year.
Wow.
And that's unacceptable.
Especially when it's supposed to be like a literature English class. Much for that.
You should not be able to pass a literature class and not read or write.
Yeah.
So that worried me. So I do, so for them, I do a good book list. I'll always start with a good book list and varied writing activities, responses to poetry, a personal narrative essay, and just, it's really, really, really important that our children can read and analyze, that they can read something and have thought about it. That's important. It doesn't have to be the right thought, the quote unquote right thought. These aren't the right answers or whatever, but thought, individual thought. And then that it's important that they can translate that thought into words on a page, because we do that as humans all the time. We write blog posts, we write recipes, we write emails, we write notes to, last night I had to write a good note, formulated note to ballet to excuse my daughter from having to dance, and she only could observe last night. I had to explain myself. I had to be polite, and I had to respect them as teachers, but also let them know what needs to happen. And those are all important things. Like, we need to know how to write well and have a good vocabulary to do that with.
Okay. So for some of these moms, some of you guys that are listening, they're like, I'm not an English teacher. I've got elementary kids. I've got middle school, I've got high school. What do they do? What do they do if they want their kids to be really competent, good writers, to be able to communicate coherent thoughts?
Yeah.
What can they do? What can they do?
So in elementary school ages, it's great. You don't have to, I don't believe you have to have formal writing training in elementary school. You just want your kids to write because they're just learning to write. And then as they get faster at it, they get more confident at it. As you write a story, like a little fun Halloween prompt or a Christmas prompt or whatever, like, you tell me a story about Santa landing on a barn instead of landing on the city house. He was, prompt them something silly, or do a family story together and pass the paper around the table and everybody writes the next part of the story. Like, it should be fun. But as they get into middle school and high school, there does need to be some formal training. And if you aren't confident, and it's okay to not be confident in writing, and you haven't found the right curriculum that you're like, I'm going to stick with this and this is going to work, that's okay. Send them online and find maybe an Institute for Excellence in Writing course. There are tons of them on OutSchool and other places, and sign them up and help them to learn how to annotate, take notes, and then write a paragraph. It's really important. And a lot of kids are missing it at homeschool and in public school. It's getting missed. It's just, I don't know why. I don't know why it's getting missed, but kids are not learning to write. And it's really unfortunate because they have a voice that needs to be heard.
Well, and you had mentioned that last year when you were teaching, you had a combination of kids in your online class. That's Talk about that a little bit. What you noticed with these kids, these high school kids.
It was an online school through a public school district. Okay. And so it is it's like in the umbrella of a public school. And so a lot of these kids were coming to me either from a public school setting to an online setting, or they were coming to me from a homeschool setting to an online class. So lots of different kinds of kids. And I had seniors. I taught a senior writing class, and there were seniors who couldn't write a paragraph with an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. And if you can't do that, then you can't write an essay later on and organize your essay with an introduction, body paragraphs, and a conclusion paragraph. So that was an eye-opener for me. So it helped me to, I am an English teacher, And yet, because I feel like there are so many other things that also need to be taught, and I want to make sure that they get a very consistent writing instruction, I've sent two of my kids so far to online writing classes where they learn so much just about from another teacher, from somebody else, how to write well and how to formulate thoughts on paper. So do that. Don't be afraid. It's worth the tuition for a class to do this very fundamental skill, to learn this fundamental skill. Um, if you're considering sending your kid to a cooking class at 10th grade, but they can't write, I mean, maybe that money should go to a writing class. And I mean it like cooking, we can learn, but writing needs to be done well, for them to be taken seriously as adults too.
Yeah.
If you're the one writing emails that don't make any sense, or you're making silly mistakes in grammar, punctuation, spelling, it, I know for a fact that when that happens to me, in a work setting, I do cock my head a little bit. I'm like, how are they spelling this word wrong? Like, or why are they not using capital letters? Like they're 25, you know?
Which I think it's interesting too, because for all the years that I was doing hiring, I was shocked at how many resumes and cover letters I got that had no punctuation or capitalization at all. Like it'd be just one run-on sentence
Yeah.
for an entire
Because that's how
paragraph.
we text. That's how children text.
Yeah.
So they just translate that into their writing. And
Yeah.
and I'm not sure about you, but if I were to get 10 different resumes and 5 of them looked like that, I wouldn't even give those a look.
Oh yeah. No, well you can't, because they represent a company, and then the company doesn't want to hire somebody who can't, do
Right.
basic
So it's
writing.
actually, it's imperative. It really is fundamental learning how to write. And I love what Julie Bogart does, because she makes writing accessible and fun. And that translate, if you can do that in the earlier years, and I'm sure she's got so many good things for older kids too, but if you can at least foster that in the early years, then it's not so scary to learn how to then organize your writing, not just in a story way, but in a, like when you're relaying facts or something like that.
So what advice would you give like a parent who's just taken their kids out of school, they're in the deschooling process,
Mm,
and yet they're concerned about writing. Their kids are struggling with writing already,
sure.
middle school, high school age, and they're trying to deschool at the same time. What advice would you give those parents?
Two things. So I'm doing this with one of my students right now, who hates writing.
Mhm.
Um, so the thing I'm doing with him right now is just having him write his narrations to me. So narrations are just a retelling of what has been read, right? And so we
Okay.
can literally tell them, or they can tell us vocally, or we can have them tell us on paper. And so, because this kid is completely unused to narration, he hasn't been growing up with it like my kids have. I've had him just write 3 to 5 sentences
Mhm.
on what he's read.
And what age is he?
He's sophomore.
He's a sophomore. Okay.
Yeah. So that's a way to get started, and that's in the realm of need to write, right? Like I
Mhm.
need you to write,
Yeah.
but also there is a realm of want to write. You want them to write, and you want them to want to write.
Yeah.
And so in that realm, you just want them to write. So journal entries are the best way to do that. And you can either give them a page of prompts and let them choose, or give them a prompt, or just say, just write about your day yesterday. But I'll warn you, write about your day yesterday can feel really scary for kids. It's very broad. Kids are busy and they've got a lot going on. And so, or maybe they didn't do anything and they don't know what to write about. So I love prompted writing, and my kids really respond fairly well to prompted writing. And it could be either like, write about your Christmas experience,
Mhm.
or it could be like a story prompt. Just write a story about something, and have a specific story prompt. And there are thousands of ideas online. You just have to Google it. But those are two ways to get kids, if you're deschooling and they hate everything about school, because they've been jaded.
Really jaded.
Yeah, that's a way to get them to start writing, and you have to gauge as the parent. Again, I'll back in the very beginning of this interview, I start with prayer, because I have to be in partnership with the Spirit. So if I don't do that, then sometimes I push on my kids things that they're not ready for,
Mhm.
or that they're not in the mood for. And I'm not saying that we can't push our kids to do hard things when they're not in the mood, but I'm saying that there are times where the Holy Spirit knows them better than I do. And they know, and the Holy Spirit will tell me that they're not ready, like, or that either they don't have the skills for it, they don't have the brain space for it, they don't have the emotional space for it, whatever it is. And that has been revealed to me over and over and over again, that I'm like, oh, you know what? We're not ready for this reading lesson right now. That's fine. We're going to do this later when they are ready, or they're not ready for a written narration yet. So we're just going to do vocal narrations as a sophomore or whatever. We're going to stay with that, because vocal narrations, as they get used to that, then they can start to put it on paper. So maybe that's the first step, is that we're just having them retell what they've read. That's the first step, and in writing.
I love that. Thank you. So any last words? Apologies. Any last words for parents out there that they're scared, they're nervous? You've been doing this a long time.
Mm-hmm.
What words of advice would you leave with these wonderful moms?
Every time I have mentored a mom who's come to me in some panic when they're pulling their kids out, I've always said to stop and breathe and know that they're capable of teaching their kids, because nobody knows them as well as they know them. And if we can start there, start from a place of breath and calm, and then slowly move through the essentials of what they find are essential for their children. Sometimes those essentials are teaching your child how to play again, because they've forgotten how to play. Sometimes the essentials are taking screens out of the home for a bit, and while they just de everything from the screens. And I always lead them to the book Teaching from Rest by Sarah Mackenzie. That book helped me to know how capable I am as a mother and teacher of my children, because it helps you to just understand that you were called to this. Like, you were called to be not just a mother, but to the mother of that child. And that is so powerful, but we have to start there. And then, because if we're in a bad space, then everything else is going to be wonky. And I know all of us have felt that, right? Like, we wake up on the wrong side of the bed, and then everything goes wrong because we are just like everything, the gears are always grinding. So we have to be in a space where we can breathe and look at our children and just know them for who they are, and start there. And don't start with all these fears and expectations, fears of what our kids are going to become, what they're not going to become, what they've learned in school, all of these fears. Let them be, because there's nothing we can do about them, and all the expectations. And then start from a place of rest and calm and breath and move from there.
I love that so much. Katie, thank you. Thank you for taking the time today. Mamas, you got this. You're doing amazing things. I appreciate Katie Jensen coming on today and talking about her experience homeschooling, Charlotte Mason, writing. Mamas, don't be afraid. It is scary, but you've got this. Have a great week. If you enjoyed this today, please like and subscribe. You could also join our private Facebook group at School to Homeschool, or sign up for our newsletter at www.schooltohomeschool. Have a great day.